Hey, welcome sports fans. Charles E. Smith Jr. here, and this is another edition of Talkin' Hockey. In just a moment, we'll go ahead and bring in Lonnie Schwartz, but want to go ahead and remind everyone, all you hockey players out there, shopping for gear online, thepuckshopshere.com. The best prices online you'll find anywhere, and free shipping on all orders over $75. Little special bonus, if you enter the promo code Inside Sports upon checkout, you'll receive an additional 10% discount. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Let me bring in my very special guest, now my permanent co-host, Lonnie Schwartz from Eastern Canada.
Nice to be on.
Toronto, hockey54.com. Lonnie, what's happening up there?
I'm doing great, man. The weather is actually stunningly beautiful in Toronto today. We're in the teens, and I'm not talking minuses. We're in the pluses, teen-wise. And it's March, obscene. But then again, the last time I had plus weather like this in March, I wrecked my car 10 years ago because it went to a flash freeze that night. So I'm not getting too excited.
All right, so you know what? And a few people may not know what Hockey 54 is about. So why don't we tell people a little bit about just hockey54.com and what you do there?
Very quickly, it's a community base for hockey. You can participate in our forums, read some really cool columns, and of course, you could see the interviews that I do with the biggest names in the game. Got a bunch up from the All-Star game, and many, many more, some NHL legends. Geez, I'd love to say how many I've got up there. There's hundreds to go through, so if you hit up the site, you can check out the interviews, read the columns, and join. It's free. The best four-letter word starting with F since the letter F was invented. Free.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and leave that one alone, by the way. So, you know...
PG. Keep it PG.
Yeah, there we go. PG-13. This is a family show here. It's a family show.
Yes.
All right. Well, last week we were talking about, what was going on in Toronto, and primarily with Brian Burke, the Maple Leafs, Ron Wilson, the goaltending situation. Really, things were kind of in turmoil, and Wilson just a few months ago had been given an extension, and then there was the thought of whether or not he was the right coach, and really he was not a hire of Brian Burke. He was there when Burke got there. So now he's gone. 1 week later, he's gone. Randy Carlyle is in, who helped Burke win that Stanley Cup in 2007 in Anaheim. And then on top of that, we've got one of your icons talking about Brian Burke. Let's go ahead and, you break it down for everyone. Don Cherry and Brian Burke and the little feud they're having up there in Eastern Canada.
Well, it's very, very interesting that you bring up the Anaheim connection, obviously, because a lot of people point to Brian Burke inheriting that team, but he brought in Pronger, okay, from Dryden, Ontario, and he also solidified the team with a couple of key trades when he got there to make them a real Stanley Cup contender. And then lo and behold, you win the Stanley Cup, although some people will say that he hampered the team once he left with a few nagging contracts. But that's neither here nor there.
Right.
He maintained and helped build a winner in Anaheim. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Good on Brian Burke. And then he comes to Toronto, and the foundation, needless to say, was a little shaky. It was left to him by John Ferguson Jr., and even before that, Cliff Fletcher, where it was, let's mortgage the future for some, present gifts.
Mortgage the future and hope we finish in seventh place?
Pardon me?
Mortgage the future and hope we finish in seventh place?
Yeah, hope we finish in seventh place. But now we've got Brian Burke, who is traded for draft picks and young talent, and people seem to find a way to criticize that. It's like you're never satisfied with the cake you're baked in Toronto. You bake your cake, you eat it too, and go, man, this tastes awful. Look, Brian Burke, I'm not going to say he was the greatest general manager in the history of general managers. He has had some issues when he was in Vancouver. And yes, clearly some people have a bad taste about his time in Anaheim. But he's come to Toronto and done his best to rebuild a franchise with some good youth and talent. And now Don Cherry, the icon of icons, the biggest loudmouth in hockey, has come on and said that Brian Burke doesn't have anyone from Ontario. There's no one from the Ontario Hockey League or anybody that they can look up to and say they can make the Leafs in the GTHL. I'm with these kids every day, and they don't have anyone to look up to. There's no one from Ontario on the Leafs. Hold your horses there, Don, with your dated opinion about the game of hockey. Okay? We're talking about a coach who took over the Mississauga Ice Dogs, which he owned at the time, and that's the team from the Ontario Hockey League, which is now in Niagara Falls. But Don Cherry was a failure as a coach for his own junior team. And this is a guy who preaches how great junior hockey is and how great of a coach he is. Well, he failed the last time he was a coach at the junior level. Badly. It wasn't just like a minuscule failure. He was terrible as a coach there. And so now he goes on to chastise Burke about no Ontario players from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, there are a bunch of them in their farm system in the AHL, and those guys primarily have been drafted by Brian Burke. So that perceived bias, which has been flipped by our very own Brian Teal, he's a good friend of Hockey 54, contributes to our site, and he wrote this really cool article, Grapes' Gripe on Ontario Talent Solved in Maple Leaf System. You can find that on Leafs Nation Network. And to me, it just seems absurd because back when Anaheim won the Cup, they were like more than 2/3 Canadians on that team.
Correct.
And Don Cherry went on and on about, oh, it's great how many Canadian boys are on the Anaheim Ducks. There are more than there are on the Senators from our nation's capital. Exactly. Don Cherry doesn't know a good argument if it smacks him square in the face because he doesn't know when he's making one. It's a dated opinion from a guy that is way past his due date. And as we discussed off air, how do you approach an icon? Because he is an icon.
Right.
And say, maybe it's time that we stop picking fights with general managers and stop rehashing the fighting argument and all the lunacy that he comes up with week in and week out and say, Don, maybe it's time where we have a more graceful exit before you become a complete farce, because it's almost even coming to that point right now where Ron MacLean barely interjects.
Right.
Ron MacLean Ron MacLean is supposed to be the moderator. Well, he doesn't even moderate anymore. Don Cherry rants on for almost 10 minutes, and Ron MacLean just introduces the subject matter and watches. And it's coming to a point where, yes, Canadians still watch. It is easily one of the most watched 10 minutes of television in Canada, even more so than the game itself. People will tune in for Don Cherry.
Mm-hmm.
But when does it come time to say, enough is enough, let's retire with some grace? Yes, we'll still trot you out and show you around to the Canadian public that still adores you, but every week or almost on a daily basis during the playoffs, do we really need someone whose opinion is far beyond its due date? Me, and ask me 10 years ago, I would have said absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
You ask me today, I'd say Don Cherry could go off the air tomorrow, and I really wouldn't care.
Right. Well, it's and it's one of those things, like you said, it's a difficult time where you're trying to retire icons, and I see that so many other places too, where it's just time to send someone out to the dog track. That's where they need to be. But and the other thing is with MacLean, when you talk about him moderating, and I watched this latest rant with Brian Burke, and MacLean was sitting there, and the look on his face is always priceless when Cherry is going through this. And when MacLean asked him for an example of something, and Don Cherry said, well, I can't give an example, and then just went on with what he was saying.
Well, and that's
so he tried to engage him to kind of move things along and put things in perspective, but Cherry was just into his own thing, and that was that. I'm right, and the end.
And look, I'm not the most delicate character. There was a little discussion on Facebook the other day how I'm as delicate as a sledgehammer when I try to make a point. But the fact is I still try and back it up with a little more than the paper in front of me with some research. He goes on and mentions Ontario. I reference the farm system through a very skilled writer and researcher in Brian Teal. I don't have all the answers, so I try and look for them. And there's one right in front of me, the farm system. There's ripe talent from Ontario. Now, will they crack the lineup in Toronto? Probably not. But you can't call Burke anti-Ontario when he's proven through the draft that he has looked at the talent ahead of him and drafted players from Ontario. And the fact is, in Anaheim, I think I counted, there were 9 players in Anaheim from Ontario. Again, some of them inherited, but the big dog of them all, the aforementioned Chris Pronger, was an acquisition Brian Burke made. So look, you can throw around provincial importance all you want. The fact is the entire team could be from the Philippines. If they were winning, Don Cherry wouldn't have any legs to stand on because he'd have no argument to make.
Well, I think one thing
I don't know. I don't get it.
Right. Well, he was talking about the fact that there are no kids from Ontario on the team, and that's where the team itself is. So it's kind of ironic that he was saying there's all these kids on these Ontario area kids on other teams, but in the team that's right there in the heart of everything, there are none currently. Now, like you said, he should have, maybe gone into the farm system thing, like you said, and say, but we've got this guy, this one, who are up and coming and may be playing for the Leafs within the next several years. But I think his whole thing was to kind of throw Brian Burke under the bus. And when you're going to do that, you don't want to give that kind of hope, as in, maybe we're just going through a cycle now, and there's going to be Ontario kids coming up in the near future. So, just hang on as far as that goes.
Could be. It could be.
Yeah.
But again, it's just more like a witch hunt going on between the two of them. And you know what? Don Cherry can argue it all he wants. He's arguing with a lawyer. Okay? Maybe not one that's as subtle as Gary Bettman, but he's arguing with a lawyer. And when you do that, generally speaking, you're not going to be coming up on the winning end of it. So, anyway, we should probably move on because Graves can be an entire episode unto itself, can it not?
Yeah, it can. That's true. And you know what? You were talking about before we went on the air. They're retiring. They're putting up a statue of Mario Lemieux. Is this correct? Yes,
there's a statue being erected, or has been erected, of Mario Lemieux in front of the Consol Energy Center, and it was hilarious how they're going on and on about not one player in professional sports is more identifiable with one city than Mario Lemieux. To which you and I both listed off without breaking a sweat how many other players.
Right.
Gordie Howe, Steve Yzerman, Guy Lafleur, Maurice Richard, Jean Beliveau. I mean, you could even say Brett Favre if you want.
You could say Bobby Clark in Philadelphia, Michael Jordan with the Bulls. How about that one?
Yeah. Kobe Bryant with L.A. I mean, really, shall we go on? Mickey Mantle in New York, Babe Ruth in New York. How many more put Derek Jeter? You want to be contemporary Derek Jeter?
Right.
You could say amongst players, he joins players that are as identifiable as Gordie Howe in Detroit. Don't be so magnanimous, for crying out loud. Wow, that was a big word. I can't believe I threw that one in there.
Yeah, that's one of those polysyllabic words. I'm really proud of you. Hooked on Phonics worked for you, huh?
Pardon me?
I said Hooked on Phonics worked for you.
Yes, it did. Hooked on Phonics definitely worked for me, even though I never bought it. It was on the infomercial.
Well, let's go ahead and move on here. We're getting down to crunch time here. Stanley Cup playoffs are going to be right around the corner. Before we know it, we're going to be into it. In fact, little over a month from now, we'll be starting in on the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, and Eastern Conference. Let's take a look at the Eastern Conference right now. We got the surprises, as in nobody expected Florida to really be contending this year. Winnipeg is hanging tough. Washington, then, a surprise on the other side where they're barely hanging on to the last playoff spot, and, Tampa Bay with all the talent they have on their roster, even though, LeCavalier has been out. But, and Buffalo also kind of sinking and rising. But how do you look at that Eastern Conference there?
There have been some crazy surges in the East, and looking at, yes, Boston still on top, on top of their division, 10 points behind the New York Rangers, whom, by the way, I don't think anybody predicted they would be this good. 91 points, tied for top spot in the National Hockey League. But when you look at the teams that are floating around towards the bottom end, Tampa Bay, I mean, for crying out loud, talk about your defense injuries all you want. Their goaltending is just not good enough. And then Garon goes out and gets injured yesterday. So now you're going to ride a horse that's pretty much been beaten to death in Dwayne Rollison. I don't get that situation in Tampa. And it pains me to say this. It really does. But Stevie Y,
yeah,
please, what were you thinking at the deadline? It kills me to criticize my man Steve Yzerman, but he needed to get something.
Well, they didn't. Why didn't they pick up a goaltender in the off season? It's obvious that Rollison can't carry the mail all year long.
Yeah, but they believed in him. They believed in him, and that's the thing. He carried them so well in the playoffs last year. Here's the mentality thinking, well, let's re-sign him. How much worse could he be? It's only been a year. Well, clearly that year made a huge difference in his play because he just hasn't been good enough.
But he carried them through the playoffs. But still, it's a matter of he's a guy who, at his age, he's going to need to be well-rested come playoff time. And then, yeah, maybe he can make a run for you. But it's getting through the regular season. Trying to ride someone like that through the regular season is really not a good move.
No. And
if anything, you got to split time with someone and then let him be the guy when playoffs start. But
yes,
max, he could have maybe 45 starts during the regular season.
And Garon has done an admirable job, but again, we touched on this, I don't think it was last week, but the week before. Garon is not a starting goaltender in the National Hockey League at this point in his career either. So they needed something, and they didn't get it. And Buffalo, we were talking about Buffalo. I mean, geez, talk about a team that just had the worst meat in a sandwich. I mean, they had a decent start, a horrible middle, and now they're trying to surge towards the end. And anybody in Toronto can appreciate how a surge at the end only fills people with false hope. So I would love to see Buffalo make the playoffs. I really would. But Ottawa had a really rough stretch, but they're back on track now. They're 7-3-0 in their last 10 games.
Right.
And New Jersey, whom last week we were touching upon was the hottest team in hockey. Now they're a little bit more on the tepid side at 5-4-1. And then Pittsburgh. I mean, Pittsburgh. You'd like to think that this is a team that shouldn't be competing at the level they are, having not had Crosby for a long stretch this year. They had him for a hiccup. Letang having been injured a couple of times. This is a team that's just that. It's a team. They're an amazing hockey team, and you don't want to throw around the term dark horse because they're sitting there with 83 points, and if it wasn't for the fact that they were in the Atlantic with the Rangers, then they might be on top of their division too. But this is a dark horse team that you can't discount, saying these guys could very well win the Stanley Cup this year. Crosby's coming back. He's just been cleared for contact.
Well, I think one of the things that Pittsburgh had to get over, and that was the injury to Crosby, and they needed to just progress as a team. So as opposed to playing as a team that was just kind of, trying to hold the fort until the great Crosby gets back, they solidified themselves finally just as a team with what they had on the ice night in and night out. And I think that's where they really turned the corner.
And great coaching and amazing goaltending from Marc-Andre Fleury. And it's remarkable what Bilesma has been able to do. And it just shows that you can win without Crosby. Then again, let's not forget, let's not sell this short here. Yevgeny Malkin.
Right.
Is the front runner for the Hart Trophy this year, and for good reason. He's an amazing onto himself. The fact that they have him it's pretty safe to say. I mean, criticize me if you'd like, but it's safe to say that you've got a solid 1A in Crosby and Malkin right now. They're both amazing hockey players that can carry any team. It's remarkable in Pittsburgh. So if I'm going to pick a dark horse that isn't really all that much of a dark horse, it's got to be the Pittsburgh Penguins. Florida has the benefit of being in the Southeastern Conference.
Right.
Let's face facts. They've got the teams that aren't in the playoffs right now round out with Washington, Tampa, and Carolina, with Winnipeg clinging on by 2 points, and then, of course, you have Florida. So that's always been the weak conference right there, the weak division within the Eastern Conference that people point to.
Absolutely.
And say, well, Are they going to make it? Well, if they win the division, yes.
And that's why I always thought with that division, when you'd had all these people within the last 3 years getting on the Washington bandwagon, and I always said, come on, look at it. They've got what, what about 20 gimmies every year because of their conference that they play in? And of course they're going to be winning the President's Trophy and everything else when they're just a very good team, not a great team. But now what's really happened with Washington, though? They're sinking down. What are they going through? Because Ovechkin is still, technically in his prime, so to speak. What's going on there in Washington?
Washington looked to be the team to beat even coming into this season because they said, wow, finally we have a really strong goaltender in Bokun. And he had some stretches of brilliance this year. But they're also facing the fact that Mike Green was injured for a long period of time, and he was part of the dynamic offense that is the Washington Capitals, or at least what used to be the Washington Capitals. And Alexander Semin seems to be on a conference call with Scott Gomez every day to figure out how not to care on the ice. Because it's painful. It's painful. During the summer months, Stefan De La Rivera, who's now with the St. Louis Blues organization, was within the Washington farm system and was Washington property, and he said on the ice during practice, there's no talent or no player more talented than Alexander Semin.
Yeah. Hands
down, period. It's ridiculous how gifted he is. But he goes on the ice and he doesn't do anything with it. It's like Alex Kovalev. I love the argument. Oh, bring in a guy like Kovalev to be a mentor for guys like this. Alex Kovalev is quite possibly one of the most overrated players of his generation.
Wait, did someone actually say that? Bring in someone like Kovalev?
I said it.
Yeah, okay, all right.
I said it. I said it a couple of years ago, too, when Montreal was moaning that he was leaving Montreal. I could care less about Alexander Kovalev because, the guy had some flashes of brilliance, and every other year he'd be good, but the years in between those every other years were bad.
Well,
remarkably bad.
Kovalev,
for a guy who was so gifted.
Yeah, he's a luxury player. That's what I was. And I was ironically having this discussion in the when I was at the last Kings game with some of the other media guys, and I said, players like Kovalev, he's one who's if you already have a good team or great team, it's great to go ahead and have someone like Kovalev that you can just kind of throw on there on the ice for extra offense whenever you need it. But there's no way you can build a team and have Kovalev as the centerpiece of that team. That's impossible. He's a luxury player.
Yeah, and that's what they sort of have in Washington right now. And it's unfortunate because everyone's been pointing to Alexander Ovechkin's bad season. Well, a lot of players in the National Hockey League would trade in this season for theirs because Ovechkin is still putting up decent numbers. He's just not putting up the standard numbers he set when he set the league on fire for the first 4 or 5 years of his career. So it's almost unfair to say that, but at the same token, I get it. Ovechkin is not playing up to his standard, and you've got Brooks Laich on the team. Mike Knuble is towards the end of his career, one would say, but you've got good young talent like John Carlson on the defensive line that can play well. But then again, a lot of people are pointing to you bring in Dale Hunter, who had success in the junior levels when he was with London, but did he have any AHL success? Did he have any pro success as a coach? No. And you risk doing that, bring him in after firing Boudreau. And a lot of people are saying, well, what system is Washington playing? Now, I can't tell you that. I haven't watched enough of Washington's games to even consider that analysis, but you take all those factors in, and those criticisms don't just come from out of nowhere. Washington's just a team that's completely underachieved. Completely underachieved this year. And it's too bad.
Yeah, and you just have to wonder, though, it's with some teams, is it, it could be the coaching, it could be they're going through something. Then again, some teams reach critical mass. And you know what? That's a good segue. If we look at the West, San Jose. How in the world? Look at that roster that San Jose has. Yet they're now clinging to the 8th and final playoff spot, 2-7-1 in their last 10 games, and actually literally in danger of not making the playoffs. That's unthinkable.
And at the beginning of the year, nobody, and I mean nobody, was going to pick St. Louis to be first overall in the West. No one.
Right.
In comes Ken, and it's a tough division. It's the Central. This is the complete opposite of the Southeast on the Eastern Conference side. This is the Central Division. Detroit, Nashville, Chicago. Okay, Columbus is in there. There's your one gimme in the conference. But come on. Look at that. Look at that division. And there's San Jose, who, like you just pointed out, clinging to that spot. I mean, it doesn't, Phoenix has cooled off a little bit. They're 6-4-0 as we look at them right now.
Right.
And now you have a team like Dallas who's picking it up at the right time. But yeah, you've got Jumbo Joe and Marlowe and Couture who should be lighting the league on fire. And
Joe Pavelski?
Not necessarily happening. You also have Klo and Pavelski who have been proven performers for that team. But again, you can also look at their goaltending situation. Look, Niemi was part of the good enough philosophy.
Yeah, but they haven't given up
Detroit, but
they really have not given up a lot of goals, though.
Yeah, you can't. Like I said, you can't just pile it on all there.
Right.
I have a big question mark in front of that team. You're the man in the West. I'm the man in the East. Anything I ever think about with San Jose should be coming nothing short of success and top of the division. And right now, fighting for a playoff spot?
Yeah.
San Jose?
Yep, I know. It's amazing. And it looked like Vancouver might be going through something for a while there, but they've definitely picked it up. And, second half of the season, they played very well.
Cold start.
Yeah.
They always have that cold start, though. Everybody pointed out Luongo should be traded. Remember that. In October and November, everyone was calling for the head of Roberto Luongo. Stick it on a pike in front of the building because he's no good. Get the vultures out. His career is dead. But now, look at what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Roberto Luongo is Roberto Luongo. He is the best Canadian goaltender, arguably, in the league right now. I prefer to stick to, Marc-Andre Fleury. I think Carey Price is a heck of a tendy. I've made no secret about that. But it's still Roberto Luongo. The guy deserves some respect.
I think
he's paid enough dues.
The problem with Luongo is that there are times when, now every goaltender has bad games. But there are times when Luongo looks bad. He looks really, really bad. And not only that, but it seems like he can be just overwhelmed at times, like Boston did to him in the playoffs last year. Granted, that was a team collapse by Vancouver last year in the final. But there are some games when when it gets tilted towards Luongo, and he crumbles under the pressure, it looks like. Other times he's great, but when he crumbles, it looks really, really bad.
And it's at the worst possible time.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the absolute worst time. So Vancouver being near the top shouldn't be a surprise.
Right.
But then you've got, again, those San Jose Sharks. But let's paint it this way. Let's look at it this way. Let's say they squeak into the playoffs. They hold on to that 8th spot, or maybe bump themselves up to 7th, maybe 6th. Maybe that's what they need this year to have playoff success, is to show that during the regular season they had some adversity. They were not the team to beat in the Western Conference. And maybe, just maybe, that's what they needed as a team to forge ahead in the playoffs. And I'm just painting it like that because, look, a couple of years ago, when Chicago won the Cup, Philadelphia got into the Stanley Cup playoffs on the last day and the last period.
In a shootout.
Of the hockey to be played. Yes, in a shootout against the Rangers. The last play of the National Hockey League season got the Philadelphia Flyers into the playoffs, and they made it to the Stanley Cup final with average goaltending. I know we harp on goaltending.
We want to call it that.
We can't say the word that a lot of people thought it would be. But
yeah,
maybe let's put a positive spin on it, because that's what I kind of like to do with hockey, is put a positive spin on things, is maybe that's what San Jose needs. A bad season for that team, at least. A bad season for them to turn around and make good for the playoffs. Maybe that's just it.
Right, and just prioritize things too, because they won the President's Trophy, and I think it was '09, and they got knocked out in the first round by the Ducks. So, yeah, it's one of those things where, correct, regular season is what it is, but once you're in the playoffs, I would say in the playoffs, the ice sheets are the same size in every single building. So, some buildings have bad ice, others have good ice. But to me, home field, home ice advantage is a little bit overrated. It really is. You know how to skate. You know the game. The dimensions are the same in every arena. The object of the game is the same. You have your players, they have theirs. Whatever. Block it out, drop the puck, play hockey.
We'll just have to find out because the playoffs aren't far away now, are they? So
definitely
the
not.
most exciting time of the year. It's the new season. It's a clean slate. So whether you finished in 8th or you finished in 1st, it doesn't matter. You got in there, and like you said, they drop the puck, you go play, you win. You have to ignore the external factors of people booing your goaltender and saying, "Go home team, go." You go out there and you play.
All right.
And that's how it's going to work out. We don't know where anybody's going to finish at this point because there's still enough room to wiggle here between Washington being 2 points out of a playoff spot, and who knows what can happen. Who knows? We still got just under 20 games each team. We'll see what unfolds.
And I will say this about San Jose. I'd be willing to bet you, even though they won't say it out loud, but every team, every contending team in the West is hoping that San Jose does not make the playoffs. I can go ahead and say that. I'll go ahead on record as saying that.
Because if they do, like we just said,
exactly.
Maybe that's what they needed. Maybe.
All right, perfect.
But we won't know until a month from now.
And you know what? We are just about out of time. In fact, we're out of time. We're running into overtime right now. So, Lonnie, want to go ahead and thank you for joining me here on Talkin' Hockey as you do every week. And it'll be an honor and a pleasure to do this all again next week.
Absolutely looking forward to it as I do every Wednesday afternoon with you on the Inside Sport.
All right, perfect. So that's Lonnie Schwartz from Hockey54.com. You can follow him on Twitter at TheSchwartz54. And, of course, you follow me on Twitter at The Inside Sports. So for Lonnie Schwartz, I'm Charles E. Smith, Jr., and thank you for joining us here on Talkin' Hockey, which is an Inside Sports production.